Hello, welcome to the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast with your hosts, EFT trainer Michael Barnett and EFT supervisor Michael Preston. Together, we will be exploring the art, heart, and science of EFT. We're excited to bring you this first season of the EFT podcast Foundations, where Michael and Michael will be breaking down the fundamental elements of EFT.
All right, welcome back to the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast. I'm Michael Preston, and along with my co-host, Michael Barnett. Welcome back to the studio, Michael.
Hey, thanks. Great to be with you as always, Michael.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
I'm looking forward to Fridays more and more as we get together and hang out and talk about EFT.
Especially since you're on another continent. So
I know.
this is great. It's
Yeah,
really
this is really nice. It's
Yeah.
always good to hang out and just chat and check in. And you were just sharing with me before we started the show that you guys are going to go skiing, and that's really exciting. You're gonna get out there on the first time. I can't wait for an update. By the way, I'm going to need an update on how you did on the slopes because I've never done any skiing. I did try snowboarding.
Wow.
Because I grew up surfing, and someone was like, you don't want to go snowboard, you want to go skiing. And I was like, my feet belong on one board. And I spent a lot of time sitting in the snow because I kept falling over. And I'll tell you, my tailbone was spent after like 2 days of trying to learn to snowboard. But I did eventually get it somewhat.
That's cool. That's really cool. They say snowboarding is hard to learn, but easy to get good at. And skiing is easy to learn, but it's hard to get good at. And all I really care about is having fun and coming back in one piece.
Yeah. I'll share another story of the first time my sister went skiing, maybe after you get back in one piece.
Okay. I have a couple too. Yes. All
Well,
right.
that's fun. Well, look, we're really excited to be doing this episode today. We're going to be taking a look at attachment. And the attachment theory is kind of the foundation of this model. It's what Sue looked at. She took John Bowlby's work and she started seeing attachment showing up in her office, right? I can hear Sue talking about this in my head, where she was aware of John Bowlby's work and the way that it worked with children, but then she started seeing protests show up in her office. And she started to realize it's attachment that's organizing these tantrums, essentially, that adults were having. And so she started using attachment to begin to understand couples and what's happening. And so we're going to spend some time today kind of understanding the backdrop of EFT in an attachment frame. And you were saying it's like this is one of the important puzzle pieces to understanding the real skills and nuances of this model is having a real understanding of what's happening from an attachment perspective. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Matter of fact, all of the puzzle pieces fit within the frame of attachment. So it's really important to have clarity about attachment and how and why we're using it, and to actually kind of expand on your story about Sue. She would tell stories about growing up at her dad's pub, and he was kind of the equivalent of a Navy SEAL. So these guys that he served with would come in, and she'd say, I would just watch them tell the same stories over and over, and then just rib on each other like, you're even uglier than the last time I saw you. And she'd say, why are they telling the same stories? And why do they just kind of cut each other down like that? And she goes, oh, it's not about the stories. And they're not cutting each other down. This is the way they connect. It's just all about them being together, right?
Yeah.
And so she really started connecting the dots. And ultimately, fast forward, she said, the reality in couples therapy, or that's what she was really working hard on at the time, marriage and couples therapy, was it's all about the bond. And then attachment theory was kind of coming alive in the field a bit, but it wasn't really being used clinically. And she found a way to really create a very detailed, hands-on way of applying this clinically, which is kind of one of the mind-blowing things about EFT.
So I like what you said. And I'm going to say this again, because anyone listening, it's a big deal what you just said, which is all of the puzzle pieces fit inside attachment, right? So you're saying this is a really important topic for the EFT therapist, right? All that we do fit inside the framework of attachment.
Everything does. And I think one of the things, and I know you've experienced this with your supervisees, so many people are so eager to do the therapy well, and they just want skills and they want interventions. And we can tell them what to do if they show us a clip. But to
Mhm.
understand how it all hangs together allows a therapist, this is kind of where the art starts to come in once it gets integrated, but how and when to apply those skills and what it has to do with the broader attachment processes that are playing out in the room. So this conversation that I'm really looking forward to having with you today is essential to really understanding a big picture, because it will help you always have a true north in your decisions as an EFT therapist about what to do in the moment with your clients. This is so key. So I'm delighted we're talking about this. I get very jazzed about this one. This is a good one.
Me
Yeah,
too.
yeah, this is
Me
good
too.
stuff.
Why don't we let's jump right in then, because this is such a great topic. But we were talking a little bit before this, and so there's a question you like to ask at externship. Yeah, and
Yes,
I've heard you ask it many times.
yes, I do. I do. And it sounds like such a silly question. So I will ask the entire group, how many of you came here to learn how to work better with significant others in their relationships? And I would say 90 something percent of the hands in the room go immediately up. They just flash right up there.
Of course.
Of course, right? That's an obvious question. And then I'll ask another question. And I said, how many of you are here to actually learn a really powerful psychotherapy that does literally depth psychotherapy? It heals the deepest wounds that people have carried since childhood. And everybody goes deer in the headlights. Not
Yeah.
everybody, but I would say it's almost the inverse of the initial hands. A few people might raise their hands. And I'm saying, well, you all are in for a ride, because EFT is a really, really solid psychotherapy that does the essence of a therapy for the psyche. And we'll talk about in great detail the stages and where we do that kind of work. But essentially, that is the journey that the new EFT student goes on. They learn how to work with these incredible processes that are based in attachment. And we'll talk about how attachment's relevant to depth therapy and the way EFT uses it. So one of the things I think is so profoundly powerful is all the outcome research with the model that specifically says we create long-lasting change that is stable over time. And that is a rare bird. That is a thing that separates
Mhm.
out EFT from all the other marriage and couples therapies. And the reason I believe is because we are doing depth psychotherapy, and we will connect these dots through our conversation right now. So this is
Right.
really important.
No, this is huge.
Yes,
So just to kind of put a pin in a piece, right? What you're naming about the depth psychotherapy when people ask, a lot of people don't raise their hand because they're like, whoa, I didn't know we were doing this. But it's also when we're doing trainings and someone will say to us, why does it have to be so deep and so emotional? But that's what you're saying here is if you get attachment, if you really get it, that moment will make sense. Like that's the true north. We're doing this for good reason, not just for kicks and giggles.
that's
But
right.
the answer for why is it such built like this? Why is it built for depth psychotherapy is going to be in attachment.
That's right. So,
Okay.
again, most people do not think beyond we're helping people heal their relationships. And there are a lot of models that do marriage and couples therapy and work with significant others in their partnerships, but none of them create stability that lasts, or at least in research, it hasn't shown. The outcome research has not shown that it lasts over
Mhm.
time. And so this connection with using attachment theory, and attachment processes, like how we apply it clinically in the room, how that lends itself to people healing the deepest parts
Mhm.
of their being that have shaped who they are in the world and who they aren't in the world. This is the place where people can have a very low ceiling on their lives because of distress that they often carry that is buried so deeply. So we use attachment and we do depth psychotherapy, and we will help connect all this together so it
Right.
hangs together well,
Yeah.
as we
So that
talk.
so it begs the question then, right? So that's where we end up going with it, right? But take us through a little bit of why this developmental theory is so important to EFT. So
Sure,
why attachment?
sure. So how to talk about this well.
That is the trick.
I'm thinking right now, I'll start, which is a little unusual, a little more narrow, and then expand and stay there, which is if we started at the end and we are assigning people essentially the experience of being the antidote to each other's deep historical pain. We do that in stage 2. And when people have done that work and we've essentially walked people into the Pandora's boxes that we all carry, they're parts of self that all of us as human beings we disown. They're too painful, too intolerable, too overwhelming, too ego dystonic, whatever you want to call it, that we can't tolerate it. So we bury it. And yet it has a profound effect on us, whether we're conscious of it or not. Oftentimes people aren't conscious of it. So when we bring that up and people are encountering parts of themselves that they can't even manage and like and cannot incorporate into their worlds, yet their partner is able to love them and support them and hold them in that space with empathy, that experience. And I want to put in like bold print, that experience that's happening in the room of someone feeling the agony of their Pandora's box that they can't tolerate, but the partner who they love, believe in, trust, respect is sending love and empathy. That actually changes people neurobiologically. New neural networks are laid down or old ones are kind of replaced, essentially. And we can talk more about that in another episode. But then we circle back to the work that most couples therapies do, and that's stage one. And we help people with their conflict pattern. We help people get out of conflict, the conflict that came to therapy, to learn how to have a different experience around. And when people have shown themselves warts and all to a partner, and the catastrophe of feeling harmed or ignored or laughed at, or see their partner just say, I'm heading for the hills, I don't want any of that. When that doesn't happen, but instead they're loved on, the really excellent work we've done in stage one that helps people get out of their conflict and find a way through that, through emotional processes that we create, it gets inoculated. That if I have shown you myself, warts and all, and you have loved me in a way I've never been able to love or even see this part of myself, then the silly stuff that tends to set off our conflict pattern, the cycle, it doesn't take root the same way. It doesn't like put a fissure in the foundation of the relationship. It doesn't create that level of distress. And it actually continues to inoculate people from the cycle so they continue to take it on together because so much security and trust has been. So the question with all of this is, how do we get there and why attachment? Right? Why is that? And how is that part of the process? And that's kind of, I know I'm going in a circuitous way to get to your question, but that's kind of the big picture. You know, we do all this work in stage one, sets a stage for doing work in stage two. And I think we track back after stage two is successfully completed. And again, it has helped inoculate and strengthen all the good work that was done in stage one. So attachment. Well, I think the things that I have been so blown away by using attachment is if we are doing depth psychotherapy, and that is all about healing of the psyche, right? Like in psychodynamic terms, we could be talking about, restructuring the character, right?
Right.
And we talk about healing the attachment bond and people having a different experience with their working models. But what that really entails is having a process that accesses the neural networks that hold that kind of traumatic distress. And one of the biggest goals and biggest challenges of psychotherapy, period, is how do we access that stuff? Talk therapy doesn't do it very well. So we have to find a channel to get in there. And I know you and I were just talking about this, but an image I always hold in my mind is very iconic. It's that iconic image, and I don't mean to be gendered here. I know this sounds very gendered, but the iconic image is a mother-infant gaze. And when you see that in its most beatific moment, it just exudes sweetness, right? The picture speaks 1,000 words. And if you were to extrapolate that to somebody's life and their developmental process in their families or in their cultures or in their communities, to being related to in that way over and over and over again, on a personal level, of course, people feel loved. They feel like they matter. They feel like they belong. They feel safe. They feel protected. And that becomes a felt sense. But if we take that to a different place and we look at neurobiology, what we know about neurobiology is our central nervous system is an open system. And one of the things that openness requires is very healthy, loving social engagement, right? And that is going to be so primary to people's neurobiology functioning at its optimal level. So if we want to think about our organism, this human being, this body, and the neurobiology of this body having its best chance at really its most optimal state, that comes from attachment.
Yes.
And so essentially what EFT is doing is we are borrowing that framework. It's like a life hack. And we're saying if this was a developmental process, both intrapsychically, interpersonally, and then neurobiologically, we can use that channel to access really deep parts of people's neurobiology that hold the traumatic distress to help heal it. We're wounded in relationship, we heal in relationship. And this is not a Hallmark card. This is neurobiology. And so that's what EFT is doing. And that has everything to do with depth psychotherapy.
And that's really helpful, right? Because what you're kind of walking us through is there's a thread that's woven throughout the life of a human being.
Yeah.
And if the early parts of our life are a thread of love and care and comfort and our needs being met, we're going to have a certain way of organizing what we expect in the world and from the world. If we don't have that, right, and we will biologically wire in a way that says, I don't expect love and care to come. I don't expect to be supported. I've got to find a way to make it through this life when these things aren't coming my way.
That's
And
right.
by and large, it's by disowning the parts of us that aren't going to get met, aren't going to get cared for, and then finding a way to essentially live in a kind of a survival mode perpetually.
That's right. Without knowing it. It's like that phrase,
Yeah, also without knowing it.
the fish are the last to know that there's water. And so this becomes our norm, and these narratives are our reality, and the brain is predicting this is what's going to happen, good, bad, or indifferent, right? The brain is already predicting. People that come seek out psychotherapy are not there to say, my life is just rocking along and everything is, sunshine and rainbows. People are in distress, and in no small part, some of that distress is pretty walled off. So there's a great phrase that I think has been so helpful for me, which is we go from biography to biology.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
Our,
great.
our biographical stories literally shape the neurobiology that we hold. And part of that neurobiology are the narratives you're talking about, the brain's prediction, which are really intense stories and often very painful stories, right? And they're the stories that if you have not had loving others who are an option to lean into in times of distress, then compartmentalization is a great strategy
It's
because
healthy.
it's like having a surrogate parent that protects you. It's like that movie where essentially there's all hell breaking loose in Paris, and this man and his little child are hiding in this basement, and he has to tell his son stories, as this little kid, about why they don't go outside and what's happening there. But we tell ourselves stories. We protect ourselves, right? We inoculate ourselves in some way if we don't have people that we can lean into. So that becomes part of our biology, right? It's not just our biography, this hard stuff we went
Yeah.
through, but it becomes part of our
It's kind of like
biology.
the hardwiring of an operating system.
That's it.
This becomes the operating system in which we start, which I think it's really helpful to name how that radar that we're talking about is running all the time.
Yeah,
And it's looking for patterns that are sending signals of safety or danger. And it's constantly up and running.
exactly.
And it's using the models that we were given within our, as you said, our biography, right? The models in the biography that were hardwired into our biology. That's the model of the scanner.
Yes.
And it starts saying, hey, what's happening around me that looks predictable and I need to find a way to respond to. And all of this is happening in milliseconds all the time. If you walk into the grocery store, your attachment system is running essentially
All the time.
all the time.
All the time. It's predicting what kind of
Yeah,
strategies do we need to employ, like this crazy algorithm of always trying to stay ahead of trouble and danger. So the
yeah,
organism wants to protect itself and stay
that's right.
safe, survive. It's very biological.
It's the sentinel at the gate.
It's the sentinel at the gate. And, if we break this down to EFT is based on biology, it's based in something very real, not abstract. These are protective systems for the organism, but they're also very limiting. They can be
Right.
very limiting and they can be very distressing. And oftentimes people don't even know they exist within themselves. So we use attachment as a way of making sense of people's processes, but we also are aware that that didn't happen in a vacuum. And that has a lot to do with part of what is locked away deeply inside, which would be a lot of pain oftentimes that we want to help people free themselves from, but we do that through their significant other relationship.
No, I appreciate, as you said, that like there's this story that happened. There's a reason why this was created. And it's kind of one of the things that makes EFT so different when we go from a field that is highly diagnostic that asks the question, what's wrong with them? Right. And just kind of go, okay, this is wrong. Oh, they can't do this. They can't do that. And here's the 6 out of 9 things that are wrong with them that give them this diagnosis. So that's always the kind of the question around a diagnosis, what's wrong? And what you're naming is not what's wrong with them, but what happened to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a much more compassionate and
Exactly.
open way of understanding. And even that's, this is what's providing the EFT therapist with an unconditional positive regard that keeps them open to compassion, because we're always thinking about what's the good reason
Yeah.
that they've put up this defense. What's the good reason it got put in place in the context of their life?
We believe it's adaptive. that it was adaptive and it really had a place given what they were having to contend with. Now you take people out of those environments where these strategies were created, these adaptive strategies, and oftentimes in their significant other relationships in these moments of real or perceived threat, when it doesn't really need to be there. And sadly,
Yeah.
the thing that helps somebody survive is the very thing that hurts and threatens their partner, right?
Right. So
Now we're
this is such an important part,
right.
right?
That's
Because
right.
that's so true. I like the way you said it. When you take that person out of that context, and if you're just, kind of a fly on the wall looking in, you might just think, why would they do that? Right? Because you've taken the move out of the context in which it was created and you've placed it into something that's not the same, but the threat signal feels the same and the move stays locked in.
Exactly.
And then you're naming how that move then blocks them from being able to create a kind of a safer, more connected relationship with their significant other.
Exactly. Exactly. Because the brain is still predicting the old stuff
Right.
and all the meanings that come with it, right?
And both partners are doing this simultaneously.
They are. So you
That's
know
the
what?
thing.
I think what you're talking about starts to now knock on the door of, so if we're talking about attachment, how powerful it is, the power of having significant others in the room. And there are just, I remember seeing the video of Sue talking, I think when she was creating Love Sense, and she was talking about this small select number of people, that if we have a small select number of people that we can really count on and really lean into, it provides us with a way of feeling supported in a felt sense and safe in a felt sense and belonging in a felt sense, where we can go out into a very complicated world and still in a representational way hold all of that. Now, with that mother-infant image I was talking about, that's happening in real time. That's not simply a felt sense. That is happening in the moment. Someone is really being held and really being protected and really being nourished and really being cared for physically, but we start to internalize that, right? And so the tricky thing is, although attachment and attachment security is a birthright, for most of us, it's not a given. And that being said, then, that leaves people with kind of emotional scars, emotional wounds. So when we let our significant others in, we have this longing to have something very different than what we experienced in the original environments where our attachment strategies got created,
Right.
but also some of the things they may do to protect themselves, or a moment that there's kind of some friction that's drummed up may start striking the old chords of where there's all this unfinished pain or shame or trauma. So significant others hold this invisible key that goes directly, it's like a direct line into people's attachment systems. And the attachment system is actually a direct line into people's limbic experience. And that's where we want to go if we're going to do depth psychotherapy, because traumatic distress is held in limbic networks that are very difficult to access. And so we actively use the way significant others are activating and triggering each other's attachment systems. And the EFT therapist gets brought into how to very, very elegantly work with those processes, both systemically and emotionally. It's very powerful work. And it is such fertile ground for helping people go very deep. And in my experience, much more quickly.
Mm.
I had experience in other models I've been trained in.
No, I like that. Like, it's like if they're showing up in our office, they're already saying to us, I want this to be different. Like, there's already a sense of an openness just by the mere fact, even if like you're looking at one of the partners and you're like, this person is so shut down and so withdrawn, but they're there. So
Yeah.
there's a sense that says there may be some pretty decent padlocks on this door, but I have a desire, right? I have a longing for this to be better. And that is what we're saying here gives us kind of like a shortcut into the work to doing this depth psychotherapy, is because the person that they long to open that door to is already in the room.
That's it.
Yeah.
And that person holds both the hope and longing in an attachment frame that comes along for the ride, feeling safe, feeling like I matter, feeling like I belong, that I'm cared for, I'm protected, which often speaks to the emotional deficits that may have taken place in earlier times of life where there's a lot of wounding. And so when there is a dust up between partners, we are aware that certain doorways are being opened, that it's not simply the topic that they're getting into a conflict about, but now these channels are being opened and accessible to us, that we can actually do some very, very deep work ultimately.
Yes.
And
Because
that's
the distress is online.
The distress is online.
It's there.
It's there. And that is actually, I think, initially something that can intimidate people early on in their EFT kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, journey, but it ultimately becomes such a gift that there are all these therapeutic opportunities, because these things are right there with us. The live wire is happening in the room. It's not abstract. It's really happening between people who love each other. And now we can access that and work with it in vivo in the present moment. It's so powerful.
It is, and it's so powerful because one of the things you said last week was, we become part of that system because we're our own attachment system that is up and running in this room as well. And you were saying as people come into EFT, this can be quite challenging and people freeze. And then really they freeze and they're like, I don't know what to do. And so even if you look at those that are trained as LMFTs, many of them pivot more away from couples therapy or even family therapy when there's so many attachment systems in the room, because it flares up, and then we have to deal with our own strategies to start coming up when things start kicking off around us, which is part of what makes that work a little bit, probably a little bit difficult.
Yeah, sure. We're human. We have our story. I remember in core skills, which is an advanced part of our training process, we were in the latter half where we're talking about stage 2. And this one participant who this was kind of a third career for him. He was in the military as a Marine. He was a New York City cop. And then he became a therapist. And so we start getting into...
That's the path everybody takes, right?
Yeah, there's the path. And we started working on going into really the deep distress that's held in people's working models. And he turned and he said, wait a second, we're deliberately taking people into this?
We're doing this on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a mutual friend of ours actually would call it EFT, emotionally focused torture.
Right. Absolutely. But you are naming, right, how you were saying how this is the window, right? The distress is the window. And it's not too different, right, than the firefighter. The only way to get people out of the burning building is to kind of run right into it.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a way in which they do. They say, you know what? I'm going to enter this building to go get these people out of there. But the EFT therapist kind of looks at this distress like a burning building that says, I'm going to have to enter their distress begin to make sense of their distress.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the thing that we hold dear and close to us is we know that actually that distress offers the most profound opportunity for healing. So even though people are feeling distress in the room, and we will actually have processes that put people in touch with that distress, but we know that a loving significant other or partner, family member is there and available. And so when that distress comes up, we may create the very first moment ever in this person's life. They feel attachment distress and they lean into a partner and a partner meets them lovingly. And we know that that is the kind of thing that helps people heal. That's part of hacking the developmental process that attachment theory has outlined so clearly, that this is how people have these really profound, deep experiences, and they have to experience it. It is not a cognitive model. It does have a narrative piece to it.
Right.
But that emotion, that raw emotion, is part of the pathway into very deep healing and very deep understanding, right?
You're kind of naming the really important part here, which is for deep change, right? You were saying how this model has a way of inoculating partners to this old system, which gives the longevity of change, right? They take this model and move forward with it. And as they continue in that secure way with one another, they keep building on what they did in therapy, the longer they keep doing it. And right. So they keep carrying it forward with one another, which is really incredible, right? Because it's like they're adding their own fuel to their car now, which is just great. I love it.
I like
but that becomes, but that is, isn't that is the goal of therapy, right? To really give people that ability.
That is, so it's like to tie some of what we're talking about together is we've been lightly naming the stages, but the first stage of EFT accomplishes what the vast majority of marriage and couples therapies have set out to do, which is help people get out of conflict and have more satisfying connections. And we do that when we create something called de-escalation that you and I will talk about in another episode. But what comes along for the ride there is that people start to begin to access and identify their own emotional interior. They start to have a new way of seeing, understanding, and even feeling their emotional worlds. They become acquainted with their partner's emotional worlds as well. And this is not a Hallmark card of just like, sunshine and rainbows. We're helping people get in touch with distress that is the thing that primes their reactivity in that initial conflict pattern they create. And the only reason I'm naming this is there are some really powerful strengths that we help people with. We help them become aware of their emotional worlds. We help them become aware of their partner's emotional worlds. We help them feel and tolerate emotion. And we help them lean in and pass these emotional experiences back and forth. We help them reach out and share them with one another in a very direct way. And we help people learn how to receive that and understand that. So when people are doing that actively, those are part of the building blocks that help people get out from under the conflict that has kind of hijacked the relationship. But we are going to borrow those processes, those emotional developments and that growth. We start going into the depth psychotherapy. And so what happens in stage 1 is instrumental in doing depth intrapsychic therapy in stage 2. And it's almost like EFT has these two different massive goals it's accomplishing, one in each stage, and they are interconnected. The work in one helps the other, and then once people actually complete stage 2, that inoculates them from the cycle or from the conflict pattern that brought them into therapy to begin with. And we go through the attachment channel to create all of this change. And one of the most beautiful things that was so compelling for me about this model is I started having a very clear experience that the people who came in to work on their relationships not only had exponentially better, more loving, thriving, satisfying relationships, but as people, they were intrinsically different, and they had gotten the best out of what I ever saw take place in individual or group therapy. So I thought, wow, this model is so comprehensive. And as we know, so many of the people that come and see us are parents. And so they get to model very thriving relationships to their kids. Their kids get to see what that looks like in vivo, right? So it's like a 3-for-1, and again, attachment is our channel to create all of this.
Yeah. That not only do most of our clients, most of our therapists are parents.
Yeah.
And it changes the way, it changes the way we show up. I'm confident of that. But it also internally exposes the ways that we're not showing up.
Yes, it does.
That's the harder part to deal with. If you're me with 3 kids still
Yes.
in middle school and under, and you're just like, I'm missing it all the time, and I know this stuff. So you got to stay out of your inner critic, because you can start to see the way that attachment is woven through everything, right? Even through sitcoms we watch, and it becomes like the Matrix. You start seeing all the attachments running behind everything.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Hacking.
So that's a lot about attachment and why we're using that and why it's important.
Yeah.
And can you say a little bit about how bringing the experience to an emotional experience, right? You kept saying it's
Right.
not cognitive, but having the emotion online, having the emotion in the room, why is that so important for the process of EFT and attachment?
Well, let's start at a very solid place, which is, again, biology. And I remember in reading Dan Siegel's book, The Developing Mind, there was one passage where he said, in all of the major domains of cognitive functioning, there's an aspect of each domain that is pertinent to attachment and closely associated emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say that, again, about the optimal development of the being, the human being, and that there are a lot of things we go through in life in our biographies that put a lower ceiling on that. And so emotion is essentially the conduit for attachment processes. It's the conduit for genuine, deep, meaningful communication. The way that we use it is a little bit different than a lot of other models. At least it was for me as I was learning it. Oftentimes people think about emotion as being feelings, and then I could extrapolate from that and say, it's all about that lovely Hallmark card where we're holding hands, walking down the coastline as the waves kind of lap against our feet.
Mm-hmm.
But emotion is a very hardwired system that is essentially an alarm system. And at the most basic level, our amygdalas are always scanning the environment to make sure that we're safe. Really, it's just a binary process of safe, danger, safe, danger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we really embrace and embody attachment theory, we're saying we need to be well connected with at least several people who we could consider significant others, or who could enter the inner sanctum of our heart and our being, that we could trust on the most fundamental level to be caring and to be loving and to be consistent. And Part of why I say that is if we grow up again in that iconic space of mother-infant gaze, when there's a moment of distress, there's a way that is hardwired into our infants and adults that even pre-verbally, an infant can express itself, crying or whatever, or hand gestures or some body language that, of course, is pre-verbal. And a parent can pick up on that. And I know you as a parent will relate to this, but that moment where you first have the experience of discerning the cries of your infant, and you're like, that means he's scared.
Right.
That means he's hungry. That means I better go change that diaper. You don't always need your ears for that one. But you can discern that the communication is really happening on a limbic level. Well, Bowlby always said cradle to the grave, right? And so if we have had really difficult life stories and there's a moment of vulnerability and distress with our significant others, we don't express ourselves directly. The brain would tell us, the prediction would be, this isn't going to work out very well. So we have these indirect ways of expressing ourselves. And in the ways we express ourselves, that sends a message just from the way. So what EFT is attempting to do is help people express themselves directly, especially the vulnerable parts that may have something to do with those moments people are triggered, or those vulnerable parts later in the therapy that have something to do with this part of me that just doesn't feel like I hold any value. And through the direct expression, it beckons something. We know emotion, the way we use it, is an information system about our attachment processes. It's also an information system that allows us to send direct communication, again, like a picture speaking 1,000 words, to our partners. And I remember Sue saying only emotion can express something like empathy, compassion, desire. Nothing else can express that.
Mm-hmm.
So emotion is correlated and connected with limbic processing. And if we want to, again, enter those limbic regions that hold really deep distress, we use the attachment system that creates an emotional experience. And now people are having a limbic experience. Now they're in their emotional experience. And
Can I say it's like we've tripped the alarm.
we've tripped the alarm.
We've tripped the alarm and it's going off, right? If we have the emotion alive, the alarm is going off in their body. Deep within their bones, it's going off.
That's it.
Yeah.
Like every cell in their body is
Right.
like, it is in the alarm experience. And what we would do, what we call bottom up processing, is we would go into the alarm, and people may not have language for that, but we stay with them, with our alliance, in that emotional space where they're triggered and they're feeling alarmed. And that can look like a lot of different things, of course, on the surface. And as we help hold them there and co-burden the alarm, which again, may be a first experience for a lot of people. Wow, somebody who cares about me and who's supporting me is in this with me. It allows people to have a little bit of a distance. And rather than simply being alarmed, they can start paying attention to what the alarm is. They can find language for it. And maybe for the first time in their lives, express that language now they're becoming aware of it to their partners. And now the partner can understand, oh my gosh, when you shut me out, you were just completely flooded and overwhelmed, right? So we're using emotion to go into people's experience, into the alarm, make sense of the alarm, help people find language for it, and have a new way of expressing it really directly. So it's very powerful. And again, later in the therapy, it also becomes a thing that is accessing the neural networks that hold that distress, that become the access to very, very deep intrinsic change that doesn't go away.
I really like the way we're talking, like there's a really helpful way of talking about this. And so I think I'm going to break it down into a simple process if I can. It's like attachment system is like the motherboard of all the what's happening and what's going on and how we've organized this world. But then we go around and something hits the emotional alarm. And in general, you might have someone that's like, that's when you lock the doors, right? Just close it all up and just get safe. And what we're doing very intentionally is saying when we're walking around and that alarm isn't going off, we're not really doing the thing, right? We're not shooting the rockets off. We're not doing the thing. And so what we have to do is not just tell people this is what happens when you do that. We have to help people's alarm system go off so that in the moment their alarm system goes off, we help them start cracking the door back open to their partner and doing something different, even though the alarm system is going off.
Exactly. And here's the most lovely thing about all of that is historically, for the vast majority of us, when that alarm goes off, we're pretty alone with it. But as we invite this into the therapy process, first we're joining. We were talking about how we're part of the system. First, we're joining our client as the alarm goes off, and they're not alone with it. And then once we've helped them make sense of that, and we use the word organize that a lot. So they are making sense of what the alarm means and why it's so threatening. while they're feeling it. Then we help them talk to their partner about it in a very vulnerable, open way where the partner really has access to that raw
Mhm.
place. And now, not only are they not alone with it, but the person they love or persons they love the most are in it with them, their significant others. And that is a revolutionary experience.
It's like the mother gaze, but for adults.
Yeah, and Bobby said, right, cradle to the grave.
Cradle to the
Like we
grave.
we need that. And this is our template for healing really deep stuff. We're not alone with this. We can bring it to people. We learn that after a lot of reps with this in therapy, that becomes something we can do and it becomes known and then it's something we trust, right? And so much happens there. And again, this is part of how we're using attachment and attachment processes to create extraordinarily deep healing. Initially to help people get out, understand, and then get out from under the conflict pattern they create. But then ultimately to be able to use the relationship as this kind of forum to go to really deep places that our lives have impacted us, that might leave us not believing in ourselves or not believing other people would ever want to be with us in that kind of distress. We use that very actively and we bring people into this so no one's alone with that experience ultimately. And that is the essence of bringing attachment in. Now, the EFT therapist learns how to become very effective in activating the attachment system, which can mean
Right.
activating pain and fear, but also activating longings, right?
Mhm.
So we become really, really excellent at doing that. And we're doing that on purpose to facilitate this process and be able to use this circuitry for healing.
I love that, right? Because what we're going to get into over the course of this podcast is what you just said. We become very effective at bringing this system online, and we're going to cover that throughout the series of this podcast. But what we've hoped to establish today was what it is we're working with. Right. And so we
Yeah.
hope that this conversation has begun to help you see we are working with an attachment system and we are activating that with the emotion live and with their significant other there as the access point to the motherboard. And then
Yeah.
what we're doing in session is constantly working on bringing that alive in the room and helping our clients do something different with the person that matters more to them than anyone else in the world. And that's all setting our stage to keep going and do the depth psychotherapy that we do in stage 2 of EFT. So we hope this conversation has been really helpful to begin to understand what attachment is in terms of EFT, how we use it, and how we use emotion throughout the process of EFT stage 1 and stage 2.
And to come full circle for this conversation, everything in the model fits into what we just talked about. This is the backdrop. This is the true north. So understanding this is where all the other pieces plug into.
That's right. Every intervention we do, every skill we talk about.
Everything. And I'm hoping that this can be helpful to people learning the model as a way of seeing where everything else fits together and how it fits in.
Right. And we won't stop bringing this back up, right?
No.
We'll help you figure out where those pieces go and what's happening in the room. So this won't be the last time. It definitely won't be the last time you hear us talking about it. But we're so thankful you joined us today. We hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful week, and we will see you all next time. Thanks, Michael, for being with me.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast. We hope this podcast is an encouragement for your EFT journey, bringing clarity and understanding of EFT to your work. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcast. To learn more about training with Michael Barnett, go to www.michaelbarnettlpc.com. To connect with Michael Preston as a supervisor, go to www.michaelprestonlpc.com. Tune in again next time to hear more of this great conversation.